Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. Hey, Mark Walsh here from the podcast. So another little extra bit this week. Looking out for guests from South America. So we don't have many listeners in South America yet, which is a shame. I'd love to have some guests on from South American countries. Part of this podcast is called Cultural Diversity. So if you know any good embodiment teachers who obviously speak English, so they speak some Portuguese and very little Spanish, who are from any of the South American countries, then get in touch. Also, other countries we kind of haven't had many guests from. So, for example, Switzerland. I'd love to have some more Spanish and Italian guests, Scandinavian. Sweden, particularly, I'm interested in having guests from the Netherlands. Surprisingly, very few people from there. So just a bit of a random shout out. If you want to hook me up, you're always welcome to suggest teachers from anywhere in the world. If they're American, it's slightly harder to get them on because essentially I like to keep the sort of this diverse and not just have Americans because there's so many good Americans. So we're discriminating slightly against Americans, though not entirely, as you know. What else? Some people are listening in Saudi Arabia. I have one student in Saudi Arabia, and she really wants to know who else is listening to the podcast because there seems to be a good listenership there. So if you're from Saudi Arabia and you're listening, then get in touch, and I'll put you in contact with my student there who's doing some good stuff and sort of feeling a bit isolated. Lastly, if you have any contacts with any of the really big names in embodiment, then let me know. So if if you know someone personally who's one of the really big names, quite often someone like, I don't know, Peter Levine, for example, is quite hard, or Bonnie Bainbridge-Cohen, they're quite hard just to knock on their front doors because they get a lot of requests. So if anyone wants to sort of personally recommend the podcast to any of the sort of bigger, more famous speakers in the world, I feel like the podcast is really established now. I'm told my interviewing is kind of reasonable. It's a good platform for people. You know, we put it out to thousands of people, so it's a good win-win. So if you know any of those kind of more better known people, we had a few on the show, obviously, Don Hannah Johnson, for example, but I really like to get it out to, I think we're at a point now where we're established and we can have some of those guys on. So thank you as ever for your help. Do participate in the Facebook group. There's a nice community there. I get to talk about the podcast, interact a little bit, and enjoy today's episode. So on the show today, Constance Clare-Newman. So Constance is an Alexander Technique teacher, very experienced one, trained with all kinds of people. She also has a background in dressage, which if I'm going to ask, but I think that's sort of horsey stuff. And so I'm looking forward to learning about that. I know nothing about that. She's come recommended by a number of people. Joining us today from California, Constance, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So how did you get interested in the body? What was your route into this?
Well, I've always been very athletic, I would say. I was really raised to be a dancer from my dancer mother, but I chose horses as a child, and I rode, as you said, dressage for many years. That was really my first career. And then I had all sorts of things happen, mostly ethical concerns about dressage. So I stopped suddenly and went to back to school, where I started taking dance classes, and that led me back into dance, but this time modern dance. And I had that kind of discipline that I was raised with as a dancer and then as a rider. And so I just went kind of quickly. I was in my late 20s, and I went quickly into dance and ended up doing some professional, but regional professional modern dance in San Francisco, and so I've been very much in my body, athletically, kinesthetically, all my life.
Great. So a few threads there. Let me start with dressage, just because I'm curious. I don't know anything about it. As I understand, that's riding around the horse. What? Tell me more. What is dressage? I don't really know what that is, if I'm honest.
Well, one way that's easy to describe it is it's like the classical ballet of horse riding. It actually means the training of the horse. And how dressage people often speak of it is it's the harmony between horse and rider. So that's the ideal. The reality is not always about harmony. And it's not very often balletic. But that's the ideal. That's what people are going for.
Mm-hmm.
And so you train the horse to do really how to move, which is why it's actually incredibly in alignment with Alexander, which is kind of the training of the person, particularly in movement. And so dressage, the most important thing is, how is the horse going? And is the horse going through its back, we call it. And it has, it's very, very concerned with the dynamic quality of how the horse is going, the relaxed nature, the suppleness. So it's supposed to be very beautiful to watch. And if you see somebody really good with a really beautiful, with a good horse trained well, it is beautiful to watch. And then, of course, at the higher levels, we do things like pirouettes and trotting in place and going sideways and all sorts of tricks, basically.
And there's a whole there's some people in Spain who do these fantastic things with horses, aren't there?
Yes.
And the sort of whole intuitive horsemanship thing. And I know I've got some colleagues who are coaches, and they kind of use horses as ways of sort of studying leadership and things like that. I've never really been into horses, so I'm fairly ignorant of this whole field. But it seems like there's sort of all various things out there, from sort of very cruel to people who are much more about communicating with the horses.
Yeah, there are a lot of things out there. The whole coaching with horses is fairly new. Although, the whole idea of the horse whisperer came up, I guess, after that movie.
Yeah.
Everybody was running around looking for the old Western guys who could be horse whisperers to them. But really, any really good trainer is a horse whisperer.
Yeah.
Just like a good dog trainer, I guess I don't know dog trainers, but the thing about how you have to know the animal and communicate with the animal in a loving way, as well as in a clarity is really important.
Yeah, this from an embodiment point of view, the sort of horse whisperers and dog whisperers and all the rest of it. I mean, obviously they're not literally sort of whispering to the animals. It's an embodied communication, right? That's what's happening. And they understand the cues and
the clarity in your own body. And horses just, that's what they know. That's what they pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, this coaching stuff I've come across, I have sort of some concerns about the validity of it, and if people are the same as horses, and if they seem to be incredibly sensitive, though I'm not sure I totally agree that, if a horse likes you, then it means you're a good leader or something like that. It seems to be a few factors there, but there's definite sensitivity that I've seen.
Yeah, I don't know about it either, because if you're a horse trainer, you just stand up there and ask them to do X, Y, or Z, and they do it. And I may or may not be aligned with my purpose in life, but I know how to do that.
Yeah.
And then again, someone else may be very aligned, but have no idea, and, give the horse a wrong cue. So I've never actually experienced it except for one time in a small situation. So I wouldn't say yay or nay to it.
Okay. Yay or nay. Nay's a good one. So we'll get someone on the show maybe who knows more about that. So let's start with the Alexander technique then. So what is that for those who have never heard of it? And how did you get into that from being a dancer?
Well, the Alexander technique is notoriously difficult to describe because it's experiential. And so it's kind of, it's a paradigm shift from what we know. So whatever I say is not necessarily that doesn't necessarily make sense, but the classical description by Mr. Alexander is psychophysical re-education, and I like psychophysical and I like education. So sometimes I use that. Sometimes I use something as simple as it's like a mindfulness for the body. Sometimes I don't try to describe the Alexander technique. I talk to the person about what it does.
Yeah.
It covers so many areas of human being and human doing that it kind of doesn't make sense to the listener at first. But let's say it's psychophysical education, and it begins with the head, neck, back, balance, and organization. So because it begins with that, it often shows an immediate improvement in posture. And so people assume that it is about posture. So it isn't really about posture, but posture is a nice byproduct. Mm-hmm. It's a nice side effect that you have better posture and better movement.
Yeah, Alexander teachers are notorious for their poise, aren't they? That's
is a word that we like. Yeah, because posture is it assumes us for most people in the Western culture. It assumes a kind of a position that you should be in. So if you say you're an Alexander technique teacher, people will sit up very straight all the time.
Yep. If you're an embodiment teacher, people get weird and they think it's body language. And if I say I'm an embodiment teacher, people suddenly get very self-conscious and feel like I'm analyzing their body language. Yeah. Okay. So not so much a position, but a study of use, right? That's my understanding of it.
Yes, and because we don't use the words actually, body and mind. Some people do. But when I'm teaching, and how I think of the Alexander technique is it's about the use of the self, and the self being an undivided organism of all of us. So it includes body, mind, spirit, emotion, psyche, voice, breath. It includes all of us, and we are not. And in lessons, I'm introducing this idea that we're not actually going to talk about the body or the mind. We're going to talk about the whole being. Mm-hmm. And for the whole being as one undivided self.
Nice. Okay, so there's a book with that title, wasn't there, by Alexander, the man who invented the Alexander technique, Uses of Self, if I remember rightly. I guess things have come a little way since his day, though, because it's surprisingly, I'd say, old. If we look at the sort of modern embodiment art. So obviously there's the ancient, the Oriental ones, but it was one of the original sort of Western body, mind, or embodied arts, wasn't it? Like one of the early ones. So I'm curious, like how it's changed or evolved over those years since this kind of guy in Tasmania came up with it. What was it, 100 years ago now, I guess?
Yes, in some cases it's very similar. That is, some of the trainings are very much about what Mr. Alexander did during his trainings, and people use what we think of as the classic Alexander technique lessons, where you lie on a table and have somebody move your limbs around as you think about undoing and releasing and not helping out. So you have gravity helping you out with releasing your muscles. And then you stand up and you move around a little bit, sitting and standing up and down in a chair. And you're practicing this integrated head, neck, and back relationship. So that's kind of how Mr. Alexander did it. And he must have been very good with his hands, obviously. And also, he must have been very clear about how to integrate this work into somebody's life. Or during the time that he was working the most, I think he would have people come every day for 30 days or even longer, I think. So then it just becomes more integrated, right? If you're doing something every day, that's really different if you're taking a lesson once a week.
Yeah.
Because you have an RSI or something.
That's quite a commitment, isn't it? And I wonder if things have changed a little bit in the world in terms of commitment to these things. Because I do hear about people getting Rolfed or taking Alexander technique or Feldenkrais lessons, and the sort of commitment I often hear is a sort of amount that I couldn't imagine my clients, even if they could afford it, but even if they could, I couldn't imagine them being willing to commit to some of the time frames, like, every day for 30 days, for example. That would just be, most of the people I work with just be far too busy for that. I'm wondering if there has been a change over the years in sort of the amount of time people are willing to put into things.
Well, I think like anything, it depends on the context. So I've never had anybody come every day for 30 days, but I've had people who started out with 3 lessons a week, gone to 2 and then to 1, if they were in really bad shape. So if they were in really bad pain, if people are in pain and they can't work, then they're willing to make a kind of a commitment, especially if they've tried everything else, then they're willing to make that kind of commitment. Yeah, I mean, when Alexander was teaching, it was also very expensive. So it wasn't just like anybody could go take lessons. You had to be, definitely well off to do that.
It's one problem I actually have with sort of, if I may, like one-to-one modalities, whether it be therapy or Alexander or, it's immediately an economic barrier. I mean, most people are simply not going to be able to afford the services of someone, whatever the art. So I don't think this is unique to Alexander, but kind of one-to-one, right? Like that's always going to be expensive if someone takes a 3-year training minimum to get qualified, and then to book their time one-to-one for an hour. That's always going to be beyond the means of most people, I think, in a society.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem in the world. If you're talking about people in pain, that's one thing, though, because people in pain could spend thousands of dollars for, botched surgeries or something.
Mm-hmm.
Really, they spend a lot of money on chiropractic and massage every week. And if they took that chunk of money and put it towards a bunch of lessons in something, a one-to-one modality, that really changed how they used themselves and how they went about their daily life. If it's something that can be changed, transformed from, if it's something that can be transformed from the way they use themselves, which is mostly actually. But yes, so then that makes sense. It's just a shift of perspective. You either go to chiropractor for 5 years or you do a couple of
it's an investment, isn't it? Like in terms of learning to use your body as an educational modality, as an investment. And I have a certain amount of time and money put aside each week for these kind of things. And it's like, do I invest it in educating myself, which might be sort of quite hard work in some ways, certainly mentally, or do I just go lie on a massage table and have, just be lazy and have someone make me feel good for an hour? And it's quite tempting to go for the latter rather than the investment of the former, the thing that might actually be not only cheaper, but, better in the long term.
Well, absolutely. And the first thing, the lying on the massage table, and I don't have anything against massage. I love a nice massage, but it's not educational. And you might learn something from how you feel before and after. And the massage therapist might be quite knowledgeable and might say, oh, it's your, hamstring here or your soleus there, or say something about. So it's not that you wouldn't learn anything, but it's going towards fixing, especially chiropractic. It's going towards fixing something quickly, as opposed to a process of change, so that you are in the world and in yourself differently. Moving
hard to sell in some ways, isn't it? Like the kind of yoga that I do is a sort of educational method. I sort of contrast that with sort of holiday yoga, which is kind of you go and you have a little holiday from life and you feel good. And I always feel sometimes I can see people disappointed when they turn up to a class and it's like, I'm not going to get a holiday. This is going to be, I'm going to have to, education. That's hard work. So I can see in some ways it's a harder sell. So the Alexander technique seems to have spread pretty widely, particularly actors and musicians seem to have in the UK. Is it the same in the States? Like, who are the people who have most embraced this technique?
Yeah, similarly, I mean, I would say, yes, it's a hard sell. It's like an impossible sell. Like people, you don't know what it is until you've done it. So you can't, so if I go around trying to sell it, it's just, it doesn't. A lot of people know the Alexander technique through their school programs. So universities, conservatories, colleges, definitely in acting, and in a music program. That is where people run across it mostly. I have a lot of students who come to me who at one point did Alexander or heard about Alexander during their training in being a performer. And depending on how it's taught, just like anything, that could be a great experience, and occasionally, I guess it can be not a good experience. I recently had somebody say, no, they didn't want to have Alexander at their school. I haven't had a conversation with that person. I mean to, but I would love to know what happened. Who had a bad experience that, how could they not want it at their school?
Awareness of what you're doing, surely that's a good thing. And I guess Alexander himself had this kind of acting-y kind of background, so maybe there's, the arts it's been quite strong in the arts, and as you say, the other group of people, the sort of people in pain, who are motivated and maybe have time.
Yeah, and so the thing is that it really can transform your way of being. So your presence on stage and your presence with another person in an acting situation. And for musicians, it's more about the self-care and the not scrunching up and tensing in playing. So because playing an instrument is sometimes stressful and challenging, and one of the things that we do when we're challenged as humans is come in, contract in, and scrunch and try really hard. And so if you want to play an instrument well, you have to learn to try to practice to play without that trying really hard, narrowing of focus and narrowing of whole being.
And I guess, anyone listening to this out there, whether they be, walking down the streets of Manhattan or on the underground, can kind of relate to that. Even if they're not a musician, there's a way in which we tense up when we try and do things, and that makes us ironically worse at those things, right?
Absolutely. That's why it's helpful for any athletic endeavor. Or, it's really it's really helpful just for being, because driving even or walking in the streets of Manhattan, tensing up is one of the things that we do instinctively, and we're better at it. If, for instance, you're walking in the streets of Manhattan and it's very busy, and you can allow your focus to open up, then you could, like a randori, right, in Aikido, you could experience that street as opening up and yourself as being a part of the big mass of people there, as opposed to like, every person is in my way and I can't get through here, and there's a group of tourists over there. And
yeah, just for listeners, a randori is a multiple attack situation in Aikido where you have to sort of, the temptation is to focus on the one person attacking you at a time, then you get hit by the others, and actually you just sort of open up and relax and take in the bigger picture. That's the sort of the art there. And okay, we've kind of diverged a little bit from how has it changed then. So, some people have kind of continued kind of trying to do the same things that Mr. Alexander did. And there, I imagine now there's many different schools. I believe there's 2 schools even in Brighton where I live. So I guess there's different ways people are now doing this.
Yes, so there's more openness, I think, to working in activities. So that is, there's always been some openness, I think, to working with a musician and their instrument. But also, different people have specialized in things like running. So swimming.
Yeah, sure, book on swimming, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Alexander technique teachers who come because they are like I'm a dancer, so I work with dancers. I'm a former horse trainer, so I work with horse riders.
Yeah.
And that can be, so people have gone into those fields. They've gone back into their fields as Alexander technique teachers. And then just your regular Alexander technique teacher on the street, I guess, has brought in more activities, I think, and exploring things in the lesson, like, it always hurts when I vacuum the house, so let's vacuum. Wow, it's always really hard when I'm doing the dishes. It's actually really common. People have a hard time working in the kitchen, and so that could be for so many different reasons, right? But working at those levels, right? The different level counters and the ways that one narrows in versus staying aware of the whole being while you're cooking or washing dishes or something like that. It seems like, well, how could that make a difference? But in fact, when you practice it differently, when you're moving in your whole self differently, it does. And I have lots of students who have no pain anymore when they chop onions and wash dishes and, basic house things that one does all the time.
And what do you really love about it? What is it that kind of keeps you, you've been doing it for a while, what is it that sort of keeps you engaged with it?
Of course I like helping people out of pain. And sometimes it's astonishing how even a small amount of lessons, and this is where I think the thing about the money isn't always accurate, because I recently had somebody who had for 20 years been thinking, I have to do Alexander technique. And she has had, 4 or 5 back surgeries and knees and everything. I mean, she's really in bad shape. She can hardly walk up to my door. And she had less than 10 lessons, and she only had so much money. So I think she took like 5 at first. But by 3, she was walking up to my front door. She used to lie in bed most of her day. She was having back to her normal life. I mean, it was so astonishing to me even that was that short. She was a former dancer, so she also had a lot of kinesthetic awareness. So it came, I think, more quickly to her. And this has been true for other people who have either a very strong spiritual practice or a strong kinesthetic practice. But so that's so gratifying, right? Mm-hmm. To help somebody who has been in serious, her whole life was very limited for the last, let's say, 5 years, lying in bed all day, getting up to make lunch and going back to bed, to now she's out doing stuff and enjoying the people that she loves and being out in her world. So that's huge.
Yeah.
I love working with performers because I enjoy, because I'm coming from performance myself, and the musicians, I love hearing the instruments, but hearing what they're playing.
And you can hear a difference after you've done a technique with them, right? That's really cool when you hear that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even just a few different things to think about while they're playing really shifts the playing. Yeah. So if it's somebody who's had a lot of Alexander, you can really see and hear and feel the difference in the whole, not only the sound, but watching the person play is a much more pleasant experience when they're not all tense and scrunched and, like I say, trying too hard, over-efforting. And every performer tends towards over-efforting.
And that's hard to watch even, isn't it? Like, so someone's on a stage, it's hard to watch someone who's over it, in the same way as it's wonderful to watch someone who, I don't know, Roger Federer, and I don't really like tennis, but I could watch him all day. He's like a big cat, it's beautiful, and it's actually relaxing to watch someone who's relaxed, right. And it's unpleasant to watch someone who's over efforting, as you say.
Right. So that's lovely. I love working with people who come into a way of being that's not over efforting, and then I have people who come in because, a leg hurts, I have knee problems, whatever. And then they end up staying because they're finding that there's some transformation going on in their relationships, in their work with other people, in themselves. There's a way of being that is so much more easy and pleasurable and delightful, way to be in the world, and that they have a choice. And that's my favorite, of course, because it's to realize you have a choice for your own responses to life is, we all theoretically know we have a choice, but to actually embody have a choice of how I'm going about my day and how I feel in myself, in my body, in my emotional self, and how I'm thinking.
Yeah, I had someone in my workshop just a week ago who I could see it was the first time probably in his life where he went, oh my God, I don't have to be a victim of my state. I'd just done a simple state shifting, centering exercise.
Yeah.
And he was like, wow. And it was the sense of empowerment he had from that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about, there's something interesting I see happening now. So you've got the sort of unwell people in pain, great, super gratifying to work with. And then the performance end people who are looking to really fine tune what they're doing, always wonderful to work with, excellence and expression. And I don't know about you, but I'm now seeing a third group of normal people get involved in this stuff. I saw a funny article the other day online which said even my well-adjusted normal friend is now meditating. And it seems like sort of regular people are starting to come to these things, not necessarily with a problem or with some field they want to be well classed in, just because there's some sense that it might be a field to study. And I feel encouraged that maybe I'm in Brighton, you're in California, but I do feel like that is happening more and more, that it's not just these two ends of the spectrum. It feels like it's filling in the middle a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I know that when I think that's what I was getting at with the last example. Somebody comes for pain. Her pain is resolved. She understands how to use herself in her daily work, and she stays because of this possibility of embodiment and choice in her responses. And sometimes I'll get somebody who is really interested in the technique because of things they've read or heard, or they're personal growth junkies. But I haven't had a lot of normal people who maybe are choosing to go to meditation, people who have up until now kind of gone to a yoga to get this idea of centeredness and
I wonder if yoga and meditation, people go to these group classes and they really like it and they get a lot from it, but then they go, well, hang on, what about one-to-one? Like yoga therapy is generally done one-to-one. And, I feel like some of the one-to-one embodied mind practices may get another sort of lease of life, I suspect, in the next sort of 10 years. It'll be interesting to see, but that's my prediction as people get into the group classes and they want to go a little bit deeper than just their sort of group hatha yoga class,
Yeah. I hope so, because the one-to-one, I do teach group classes, and I also teach a new class that I'm calling Moving with Pleasure. And that's a more of a movement class, but it's really about presence and embodiment and enjoying one's self in movement. But the one-to-one thing is so different because people feel willing to go into what their deepest concerns are, whereas that's not always true in a group.
Yeah.
Even if the facilitator is really good at holding the space, in a big group, there's always the group dynamics, and there's always people that are going to be the ones who talk all the time and cry immediately. Take up a lot of space, and then there's going to be the people like me who are just the observers and just not willing to go there.
That's really personality and culture based in my experience. I'm an extrovert, so I'll take a lot of space in the group. I don't mind. The introverts, I just, my wife just would never do that. And it's really cultural. Like we had two Israelis on a last week. I was doing an online training, and the two Israelis of a group of about 50. Between the two of them, they must have taken about 30% of the space. And eventually, I sort of said, "Like, it's not the West Bank. Stop taking it over." And I made a joke about it. And I know them, so they laughed, and they know I'm not anti-Israel. And the Americans, the other ones that I see in groups, when you have an American in England in a group, one American will take a lot more space than the English people. The English people sort of step aside, either resentfully or thankfully they've taken the space. And I don't think that ability to take space as I am now is a problem. It can be a really good thing. That Americans and Israelis are certain cultures and personalities like myself have, but it's certainly one to watch out for a little bit. And for those who aren't personally or culturally inclined to it, groups maybe aren't the best place to get all their needs met, I think it's fair to say.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. And I think that somebody like me, more of an introvert, is is drawn to the one-on-one and gets much more. It's just that would be the place to start.
It can feel like a treat to me. I had 8 Alexander technique lessons with someone locally, and every time I went, it was like a little treat. It's like, oh, there's this qualified person who's just me and my concerns for an hour. It was that's kind of how I looked at it. You mentioned mindfulness before, so that's obviously big thing these days. Everyone knows about mindfulness. Even businesses I work with have heard of mindfulness. So, how would you relate the Alexander technique to mindfulness? Would you say it's a form of mindfulness, or something more than that, less than that? What would you say?
Well, I think there's certainly an aspect of mindfulness. If you think of mindfulness as giving attention, one pointed attention, this technique is about giving attention to particular things that are needed in the way that one is being. So even at the very beginning, the first thing that an Alexander student learns is the delicate and easy balance of the head on top of the spine. So just bringing mindfulness awareness to that can sometimes make quite a difference in somebody's comfort during the day. Or let's say they hike, and practicing head balancing easily on top of the spine, kind of floating upwards, rather than crunching down in the hiking going up the hill perhaps, makes a big difference. So when the head is balanced, this is one of the main core things that Alexander discovered really on his own, and other people have since it's been proven that the head has a lot of how the head is balanced on top of the spine is primary in balance of the other and the use of the other parts of the body. So just attention to head balancing easily is a mindfulness practice that makes quite a difference. Certainly with people with back pain, a lot of people with back pain have a head kind of coming down on top of the spine, or the classic head forward position that we have most people in now with the
mobile phone. People can't see it listening, but I'm putting my head forward. And it's
just
really
pick
quite
up your phone
disturbing.
And you see it everywhere. So,
yeah.
And so, you can actually pick up your phone and hold it just a little bit higher, not like way up in front of your face, like some of the...
Why don't we try this now then? Because I'm assuming every single person listening to this has a mobile phone with them, or else they wouldn't be able to listen to the podcast. So, and also, it's 2018. So, guide us through this. Let's do this as an exercise, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, sure. Okay. So you pick up your phone and just have your arms down by your side or in your lap if you're sitting. And while you're keeping the arm with the phone, the elbow just hanging easily by the side, you don't have to move that really. And then you just bend your elbow so your forearm comes up a little bit. So your phone is maybe like in between breast and shoulder height, depending on where one's arm is. And you have
how saggy your boobs are. Anyway, go on.
You have an easy resting hand that your phone is in, and then you can just tilt your head from very high up on top of your spine, and your spine goes all the way up to behind your nose. Really, it's between your ears and behind the roof of your mouth. So if you can think to yourself, oh, I have some space where I have a joint all the way up there, and I'm just going to tilt my head. Perhaps I tilt it up and down a little bit, and just find an easy spot where you can see the phone, but your head is really balanced.
So the shoulders are relaxed, the head's poised, you're not sticking it forwards.
That's right. The neck is not going forward. The head is just tilting up there on top of the spine. And then you can use your thumbs or fingers thinking about just a little bit more ease. Like you don't have to bang on the phone to do the typing or keyboarding or whatever we call it. I don't even know what it's called anymore. Yeah, and then you can notice that as I'm looking at my phone, I'm breathing. And as I'm looking at my phone, I'm letting the images on the phone come towards me. I don't have to reach out toward them with my eyeballs.
Yeah. Yeah, there's sort of the eyes of hate, which can be very much programmed into us by the mobile phone, of sort of staring very intensely at a screen, not letting in the peripheral, noticing you stop breathing when you're on your phone. And also the jabbing pattern in Laban terms, it's the same pattern as hate, direct, abrupt, strong movement pattern is literally how people move when they're, furiously angry.
Yeah.
My wife always knows when I'm in a Facebook flame war because of how I'm tapping my phone. I've lost that sort of ease and calm, and that's lovely. So another one I've seen, another Alexander technique, talks about bringing the phone up a little bit higher. People tend to sort of put their phone down and then curve their body over it.
Well, I think that when you have the phone right up by right in front of your eyes, first of all, you feel like it looks stupid.
Right.
And people are like, what are you doing? Right. So it may be that nobody thinks you look stupid, but it feels stupid. And when you see those like diagrams or something of how to use your phone and it's up in front of your face, it just looks lame. And we all think that. So better. And also, to me, I feel like having the upper arm just resting by your side and being able to kind of easily move your forearm around, to me, that works better.
That's wonderful. I understand that. And if anything, just, noticing use around the mobile phone, like how do you breathe? What angle is your head? Like that in itself is going to be a pretty big win for most of us. And you do see these bodies that have been formed around mobile phones almost now. And, I love my phone. I'm not anti-mobile. I'm not a technophobe. So it's nice to see someone working with a phone. Obviously, the Victorian era when Alexander was around, this was, people did not have mobile phones, right? So
no, but I actually do always in a lesson and in a group too. I say especially if I'm working with teens, I say, okay, everybody get their phone out, because they want to get their phone out anyway, right? Get their phone out and let's explore texting in balance. And I have one of my little 1-minute practices that I have as resources up on my website is called Texting in Balance.
Nice. I think you're literally the only other person I know who does that. In the embodied yoga classes, we'll ask people to get their phones. I do mountain pose or something, and I'll say, right, you feel your feet, you feel your breathing, right, you're expansive, great. Okay, now everyone get their phones. And that in itself is a challenge. And then the really advanced, I say, right, if you've done at least 5 classes, now open up social media,
Right.
and that's the advanced lesson, And
Absolutely.
I feel like if we're in an educational modality rather than a holiday modality, we should totally be working with the reality of people's lives. And, what is more, that's a big reality for a lot of people's lives.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think is that Alexander teachers do a lot with musicians is the person is, we've worked however much we're working, and we say, okay, let's do some playing now. A musician goes to get their instrument, and everything about their being has just changed.
Interesting.
They go and grab it. They start opening their case in this completely different way. So we say, whoa, let's just stay with how we are right now, open, expansive, easy. And this is a stimulus that you have as a musician to get your instrument out of its case. Let's meet that stimulus in this different way, in this more balanced way. And the same thing with the phone. You can, when the phone beeps or dings or whatever sound it makes, people just, they cannot leave it alone.
I saw this at the end of yoga classes. Everyone would be, after an hour and a half of yoga, really blissed out, coming out of Shavasana, and that would last literally the time it took them to walk across the room and get their phone out of their bag, which is inevitably the first thing people do at the end of a class now. And I thought, and then they went straight back into habitual stress mode. And I thought, hang on a minute, you've just wasted an hour and a half of your life. If you're literally not taking it, they're not even out the door. It's not like 2 hours later. And I was thinking, we're really failing, not to blame the students, we're failing them as yoga teachers if that's the context they go into and they're immediately stressed. I've also seen it with money. As soon as people, I'll take out wads of cash on trainings, because as soon as people hold a banknote in their hand or a credit card, they immediately go into a mode that's completely unhelpful. And it just feels like we need to reintegrate some of these things,
Yeah. People used to write checks more than they do now. And I would actually have the check writing as, part of the lesson. So still encouraging this, not scrunching down and holding on to the pen. So we would hold on to the pen differently and write with more freedom. And, people would always notice the difference in the way that the writing looks, and that there's that immediate habitual tendency to just go scrunch down, tighten up, go into your old pattern of thinking about money. And
it's like it's physical, right?
Even when you've just had an Alexander lesson and you're not stressed about money, even, everybody did it. It's just a cultural habit.
Yeah, and I find because generally money changes hands before or after a yoga class or an Alexander technique lesson or whatever, you can actually turn that into part of the practice, is what I encourage my students to do, to be like, notice if you're throwing the money at the person at the door. Some people sort of throw money, some people sort of try not to look at it, some people resentfully giving it, it's just like, kind of just notice how you are around that, I just turn that into part of the, as it's right before or after the class anyway, why not,
Right. Right.
Okay, great. Anything else on technology? Because I feel like we underdo technology on this show, and so many embodiment teachers are sort of almost anti-technology, or just see it as, oh, it's awful, but it's part of the world. So anything else on technology use that you'd...
Yeah. There's a guy I don't know if you've heard of or interviewed, Peter Grunwald, he's an Alexander technique teacher who does a lot of work with eyes. And he has a book and a program called iBody.
Okay.
And I've integrated some of his work for myself, but the thing that seems to be the most helpful for a beginning Alexander student is this idea that you can look at your screen without reaching forward with your eyeballs.
Yeah.
But that you can visualize, literally, that your visual cortex is in the back of your head, and that you're seeing from back there, the back of your head. And so then you're softening your eyes, you see more of a periphery, and you can also have the sense that you're allowing the images to come to you. So I always talk about that if somebody, if we're doing keyboarding, laptop, iPad, whatever. And then you can also, when you're letting the images come to you without straining forward towards them, you can say to yourself, oh, my font is not big enough. And you can raise your font very easily. It's just like 2 little clicks, right?
That's one of the best things I've learned to do on my computer. Even email is just this. I've got a kind of shortcut to just making it bigger. Then I don't have to lean forward.
That's right. I think that's really simple, and people will say something to me like, oh, I just don't have time.
But it saves time, right? Because you're actually much more efficient. Yeah. And the thing about letting the image come to you, that can sound like an abstract kind of Californian type thing, but I just really encourage people out there to try it. Like, it's hard to give as an instruction, but just that reframe of, imagine the image is coming to you, and it changes you from a yang to a yin mode. And I found that relatively successful as an instruction, even though it might sound a bit odd or a bit like, what's the difference? It's the same bloody thing. But I just really encourage anyone listening to try that wherever they are, to imagine the eyes are from the back of the head, and to imagine whatever they can see, whether it's a computer or something else is coming to them. Because it really, for most people, that does shift them fairly strongly.
It does. The other thing that you can explore is that when you're reaching with your eyeballs, you actually are tensing your eye muscles, and you're probably drawing the eyes closer together versus softening the muscles in the eyes and right behind the eyes and in the face, and allowing the eyes to widen away from each other. And so that might also sound sort of woo-woo, I'm allowing my eyes to widen away, but you can actually sense your musculature in your face widening and narrowing.
Yeah, there's some great Feldenkrais lessons on this I'd point people to as well if they want to explore the eyes. And there's some that I could actually feel the muscles in my skull and the back of my spine moving as my eyes move. Like there's this very direct link between the eyes and the spine, isn't there? And like I was quite surprised that I could actually feel that. So I just point people to some of those lessons if they want to explore some of that, because it can be quite subtle, but those lessons will help.
And the idea that your head is allowing a lot of space by floating around up on the top of your spine, as opposed to your head is heavy and you have to hold it up, or your head is kind of collapsed and it's dropping down onto the delicate vertebrae of the neck. So giving a little bit more space by allowing that upright, floaty head and releasing the muscles at the top of the neck makes that all easier with the face and the eyes. If you're collapsing your head down, it's harder to access face, eyes, other things.
I think Alexander technique always seems to be very skillful in its use of imagery, saying, your eyes the back of your head, or imagining this, kind of thing. And an anatomical based imagery, reframing things for people seems to be a very effective part of the method, surprisingly so, I found.
Well, that's interesting. And that's a new thing, because Mr. Alexander didn't do that at all. And in fact, he didn't even really talk about anatomy. Like, my generation of teachers have done quite a lot of anatomy study, and we think it's very important, and that comes from body mapping and how we've realized that when one thinks one's head starts kind of where your chin is, you move it from there. When you realize it's way up high, you can move it from there. But Mr. Alexander didn't do that. He would say to people not to feel it out. So that's the other thing that is an Alexander principle that has for some people shifted. Like, I feel like feeling is good. I like feeling, and I like feeling good. So I'm going to feel. Now, where that would get in the way of practicing the Alexander technique is when you're trying to feel something rather than doing it by the principles. Mm-hmm. He would say that the principle is to undo unnecessary tension and to go send the chi, he said the electrical impulses, up out the top of the head, out the side, so lengthening and widening, and the depths with the breath and the idea that back is staying back. that the principles are what you're doing or undoing, as the case may be, and you're not really thinking or trying to move your shoulder blades somewhere or send or hold your knee in some position, or you're not really talking about the anatomy in the way that, for instance, a lot of the yoga anatomy teachers are doing right now. That is too difficult for a human to, because then you think, okay, well, if I'm thinking of my thigh bone and where it's meeting my hip joint, the greater trochanter, then I should be aware of the ligaments that are attaching that. And then at that point we go down. It just
make you weird and crazy trying to do that, in my experience. And I find it having a good image to work with, or a sort of key directionality, can be much more helpful than, to just trying to be constantly hold in mind every piece of anatomy at the same time. You just end up being weird.
Right. Yeah. It might be useful and interesting to explore, what is the hip joint made of, the acetabulum and the greater trochanter and the synovial fluid and all those good things. But really, you just want to send your leg away from your hip and not scrunch it in there, and things will be better.
So I feel like we're just getting into it here, but we do need to move towards wrap up. What are some of the pieces of homework I know you emailed me earlier saying you sometimes give homework to people, and I think that's maybe helpful for listeners as well. Like, what are sort of some of the homework you tend to give after a class?
Yeah, I always give some practice and ask about practices in my lessons. And the first thing for a beginning Alexander student, really any Alexander student, is constructive rest. So constructive rest is a practice of lying down on the floor or on a mat and letting gravity help you out while you're in the horizontal. And it's a time for just being rather than doing. It's a time where the attention is on the undoing of whatever is contracted or held or needs to release. So we kind of do like a body scan, if people are familiar with that idea. And we try to bring the awareness back to just now, just being, rather than letting the head go spin off in different directions. So it's a practice of mind and body quieting, really. And there is actually a lot of constructive rest stuff up online. And I have it on my resource page. I have an audio that I encourage my students to go to. And it's a 21-minute.
Well, this is a good place to plug your website in. So that's Constance Clare with no I, CLARE, ConstanceClare.com. They can find that there.
Yeah. So that is, that's a really transformative practice, because really people do not take 5 minutes even, 10, 15, 20 is great, but any time is good to just be. To be with oneself, to give oneself a space that is like just a space of openness and not needing to do and, think about what's next, just to be.
Yeah, it's something practice I've got a lot from. And I'm just seeing on your website as well, there's these great like little 1 minute practices. So if people want some more kind of like practical stuff, there's some really cool little things there, some video resources, sitting resources. I'm going to keep that open on my computer to have a proper look at tomorrow, actually. That looks like some really useful little quick wins there.
Yeah, and the other thing is this idea of the head not being scrunched down on top of the spine. And by allowing the neck muscles and the jaw muscles and the throat muscles to just rest, or to use just the right amount of tone. So not enough tone is collapse, and too much tone is tense. So there's just that right in between place that we practice in a lesson, but that you can even feel on yourself. You can just put your hand on the back of your head, back of your neck, at the base of your skull, and you can just tense those muscles and notice how your head is scrunched down on top of your spine. And then you can release the muscles and notice how that balances. And then you can completely collapse, relax, ugh, I'm so tired, I can't even. And then you can notice how that just gets the whole body to drop. And then go back to that nice in-between place. And just the awareness of that, just bringing that into your day here and there, is a great beginning practice for sensing that you have more possibility of balance and ease and space in your whole life.
Well, I feel like I've just had a free lesson. I haven't had a lesson in a couple of months. So, Claire, thank you so much. That's Constance, sorry. Thank you so much. That's been fabulous. So I'm going to call that a mini lesson when I write this up. That's great. So I think there's lots of great things for people to be curious about. Loads more on the website. I see an interview with Brooke on liberated bodies. So I'd point people to that as well if they want to hear more about you. Do you have a closing message about the body for us, Constance?
Well, my closing message is that we're not a body. We're an undivided self, which is an organism that is in process. And I don't know if that sounds woo-woo, but we're always in process, and we're never just head thinking about the body, but we're always the whole self. And we have choices about how we go through our lives in the world in this undivided self.
Constance, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.